Hmm? Ah!
I was the kid who had all these odd jobs, like recycling. That
Yeah.
was my thing. I used to do bike stunts. Do not ask me if I could do really good bike stunts, but I would charge for my shows.
Bike stunts. Podcast Junkies, episode 143. Welcome back. This is The Podcaster's Voice. I'm your host, Harry Duran. This is the show, in case you're new, where we search out interesting voices in podcasting and get them to kick back their heels, sit back, relax, and let their minds flow. I wonder if anyone knows that hip-hop reference. If you missed last week's show, we had a great conversation with Natalie Ekdahl, host of the Biz Chicks podcast. We talked about all the time it took to get her on the show and why she waited until the right time, which I think in the end worked out well for everyone involved because we had a fantastic conversation. She's an incredibly smart woman and is a really good business coach, and that's a testament to the success of her show and why everyone that listens really gets value from it. So I'm really happy she finally made it on. This week, we have the pleasure of speaking with Elle Martinez. She's the host of Couple Money Podcast, and Elle is another friend that I've run into at conferences, at Podcast Movement, and we had the pleasure of sitting next to each other at Jonathan Oakes' Trivial Warfare Patreon talk at Podcast Movement, so that was a sign, and we knew we were going to make it happen sooner rather than later. So this is a great conversation. We talk about the impetus for her starting her blog, Couple Money. We talk a little bit about cash flowing. She actually defines that and how she learned to edit her podcast. We talked about a really profound episode on her show where she learned a lot about the importance of empathy and some other fun stuff, including a skill that I did not know she had, and also what her family thinks about her being a podcaster. So all in all, as usual, a really fun conversation with someone that I've just known from afar, and now I get to have a fantastic hour-long conversation with them. This episode is brought to you by Podbean. Head on over to podbean.com/podcastjunkies. Did you know that in addition to all the services that Podbean offers, they also have a private podcasting solution? It's a turnkey solution for delivering protected audio and video content for organizations, employee communications, training, and more. And as I start to work with more corporate clients, I see that this is something that could be a need for them. And the beauty of this solution by Podbean is that they'll securely deliver your content, and you can share that with members or employees. It's enterprise reliable, so they work with Amazon Web Services, and they've got a really simple workflow for getting content that you need protected behind a paywall. Sorry, not a paywall, but an enterprise firewall. So if you are with a company or you know of a company that might need that, then definitely. I don't know of a lot of other podcast hosting solutions that really cater towards businesses as well. I mean, Podbean currently hosts 120,000 individual podcasts in addition to 1,000 business podcasts as well. So that's another feature that I know not a lot of people are aware of. So head on over to podbean.com/podcastjunkies and then scroll towards the bottom. You'll see that in the advanced podcast section. Make sure you stay till the end of the episode where we have a retention hashtag. If you're new to the show, that's the way I find out who's paying attention. I love to see these get more and more popular on Twitter. It's a hashtag that I come up with specifically for this show, and it's only going to be at the end of the episode, and it's my way of seeing who's listening all the way towards the end. So for now, enjoy my conversation with Elle. Elle Martinez, host of Couple Money Podcast, co-host of Couple Money Podcast. Is that right?
Host.
It's host. Okay.
Yes.
Welcome to Podcast Junkies.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
It seems like I mentioned it, or we ran into each other in 2015, was it? Or 16? It's one of those things where you keep, there's faces you see, and then you see them, and then the next year you say hi, and then the next year you're like, you say more than hi, and then we sat next to each other at Jonathan's thing. Yeah, the Patreon thing.
That was a really good session. He knocked it out of the park. That was good.
And I think everyone's got their own style when it comes to speaking, and so you got the sense that as much as he probably practiced for that talk. And for my listeners, it was a talk about the benefits of using Patreon and how much success Jonathan has had. Jonathan Oakes, previous guest, host of Trivial Warfare, on using Patreon, and it was really just in his own voice, in his own like relaxing style, and just his presentation was like laid back and just quirky, and you know, it was a little sarcasm in there. It was just really fun to watch.
I loved it because, like you said, he had that quirk and that personality, and at the same time, he has the numbers.
Yeah.
And I'm a numbers person, and I loved how he's like, "This is the reality. Do not think, oh, if I can get like half my listeners to pay $1 or $2." He was real about it, about what percentage and, you know, what to expect. I love stuff like that. So I thought he did that. He walked that tightrope really well.
Have you done a lot of speaking, or is there anything you picked up from his presentation from that perspective?
So I've been doing panels, and I had a panel this year, Podcast Movement, and I love the energy of that. But next month will be my first solo. I'm doing a breakout session on the podcasting track for FinCon, which is the main space I'm in.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about personal finance being more personal, because I feel like there's not enough story-based, narrative-based podcasts, because that's kind of how we interact with money and finances. The numbers scare people sometimes, when you're dealing with debt or you're trying to do something big. And I feel like there's such a need to include more story. Even if you're just doing with interviews, you can be a great interviewer when you're telling stories and asking and pulling that away from your interviewee. So that's what I'll be discussing at FinCon. So I'm excited, and all kinds of just nerve knots. And I think I've rewritten my outline 12 times.
Yeah.
But I have to commit to it. I promise the end of this week that what it is what it is, and then I'll flesh it out. Did
you do any formal training?
No, I think for me, what's helped out is just I'm enthusiastic about this.
Yeah.
And I think that motivated me out of my little introverted self and that fear. I mean, I've done stuff like growing up, maybe like college courses, in my congregation, public speaking and so forth. But I wouldn't say like I formally see myself as a speaker. But I feel like if there's any way I can help someone, and that's kind of how I got into podcasting. I was kind of dragged into it by my readers, where this might shock you, but they're like, we need this information. I don't have time to read this article. And I kept hearing it for years, and I thought, you know what? Why don't I do a podcast? And I've been a fan for years, and I think just like a lot of podcasters, I didn't like my voice. I mean, I came up with all the excuses.
Yeah.
I don't have no broadcast training. I don't know what I'm doing. What equipment would I get? My voice, I can't stand listening. And then I realized, you know what? If I can help somebody, if I can encourage them, then it's worth it. And I've bitten the bug, and it's been over like 210 episodes.
That's amazing.
So enjoying it.
So I get the sense with a lot of financial help podcasts and blogs that the origin story there sort of came from something personal that happened or an event. And I'm wondering if it's the same case for you, because it seems like the podcast came from the blog. So maybe the question is, what was the impetus to start the blog?
The very short story before I get into it is I started Couple Money because I needed it. We needed it. There's a lot of great like personal finance blogs out there that I was reading, but I couldn't find something that addressed that intersection when you're merging lives and money. All those awkward conversations. Do you loan money to in-laws? Mine, yours, ours, where do you draw the line? And then dealing like with how do you manage money? Because we met in college, a mutual friend introduced us, and we got married, I guess, fairly young. And for us, we shared most of our stuff. But we thought, okay, we're broke college kids. We were dating. We knew all the cheap eats. I promise you, like every hole in the wall, free festival, whatever we could do, dollar drinks, we'd go 50-cent tacos. So we thought this was easy, right? We're both broke. That's what the answer is going to be. But we heard from family and friends, it's like, make sure you're on the same page about money. And we were like, oh, yeah, we'll be responsible. And we got engaged, and we said, let's lay out all the numbers. Which we think, it's like 2 accounts, maybe checking accounts. And it was a wake up call. So for my fiance, now husband, he had one small student loan. He was not investing or saving. I mean, he was doing a little bit of saving, but he basically was like a cash only system for his finances. And I had the trifecta of debt. I had the credit cards.
Yeah.
I had the car loan. I had the student loans. Thankfully, it was only for the last 2 years. The first 2 years, I had gotten a scholarship and took a break. But yeah, we realized we were totally in different places, and it was kind of scary. And I will say it is an advantage having a podcast because I interviewed him years later. And I was like, well, how did you really feel? Because he took it pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, he was like, you know what? Okay, this is going to be our debt. We'll work it out. But he's like, I was scared. You couldn't even tell me the total amount. And that was true. Like I had a ballpark figure, but I never really sat down and was aware of it. So that's very like summarized beginnings that motivated me to start Couple Money and just share our journey. And then eventually became people were chiming in with their stories. And then I was meeting some other fantastic people. And I thought, you know what? Some of the podcasts I like were Tim Ferriss and Planet Money, where they either interview people who are at the top of their game or they're investigating and they tell a story and share it. And so it's kind of not that level of production. I wish I could do it like Planet Money. But that's the goal.
It's not in the budget.
It's not in the budget. It's not in the budget, but because, I got a cash flow. You can't go into debt doing like, a podcast about getting out of debt and retiring early. So I just thought, you know what? People interview people who are at the top of their game and get takeaways. Why can't I do that? And why can't I ask them, okay, now that you're out of this and you retired in your 30s or you paid off $109,000 of debt, like what were those first discussions? What were those arguments? Because let's be honest, it was most likely arguments and fights. And then how did you work through that? Because I do want something positive, and my goal, I keep the podcast short, is to have like a takeaway or a conversation idea that when the episode's done, they know what the next step is for them.
Do you get
that makes sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. Do you get a sense that people move through your show? Like, is there like an arc where, they have a problem, they find your show, you're their beacon of hope, and, they come to listen to you week in, week out. They do what you say they should do. They have a success story, and then, they sort of like listen, they stay as listeners, and then you have a new wave of people coming in. Or is it people that were with you at the beginning and they're so appreciative of what you've done and they just are fans for life?
It's been a mix. I will say, like, there are some diehards that have been through the years and they've been fantastic. And they update me. So I do have like social media presence and I share and I'll have comments there. But a lot of the nature I talk about are those things you don't want to share. Like, hey, by the way, my wife screwed up or my husband screwed up and we're like deep in debt. You don't tweet that. But I get a lot of emails and they're like little books. But there's been some that have just basically taken me through their journey.
Yeah.
And it's always fascinating to watch people pay down the debt and just talk about how much easier their marriage feels because they don't have that pressure on top of them. So I always find that fascinating. And then I had a recent reader who discovered the podcast, and they went through all 200 and something episodes in the last 2 months or something like that. It was like a record. I don't even think I could listen to that many podcast episodes.
Isn't that a thing? Just as a quick aside, like I have that occasionally. Like someone's like they find your show, and they for some reason resonate, and they want to go back. And there's some people that are like completists. They want to hear the whole story. Yeah. And I've done it occasionally. I don't do it as much as I used to, but every once in a while I'll do it myself. Like, and maybe if it's 20 or 30 episodes, I don't know about 200, but yeah, it's an interesting feeling as a podcaster to. And like almost like a sense of responsibility, and you're like, man, I hope they're getting value out of those early. Yeah.
And that's the thing. I was kind of like, wow, that's awesome. And the next thought was like, oh no, because you remember those first episodes. And to be honest, like I started it. Oh my goodness, I want to say, I think one of my girls was like 2 or 3.
Yeah.
And I would do it during her nap time.
Okay.
Like the interviews, everything, narration and stuff like that. And it was this soft whisper. And people were like, oh, I love your calm voice. It wasn't because I was trying to be calm or soothing. It was, I don't want to wake up the toddler in the next room.
That's
And then I learned a lot about editing because I needed to. Really great interview. I can recall this like it was yesterday. This mom was cash flowing her daughters. Like these parents were cash flowing their daughters' college, which can be pricey, and they were sharing all these tips. And
so for the benefit of the listener, can you describe what cash flowing is?
What?
Can you describe cash flowing?
Oh, cash flow. So basically, I don't want to go into debt with, this business. This podcast has taken off the site as well. So what I do is I save up. I mean, I try to practice what I preach, and I make sure that the cash is there to buy it. So, getting the equipment and so forth, because the idea is to avoid debt. I might do a short term and then at the end of the month pay it off.
Okay.
But cash flowing it as much as possible because, it's so easy to get into the gadgets. And I always am tempted when I see your rig right now and I'm like jealous.
This is courtesy of sponsors. Shure sponsored me for 3 months. And since I'm a podcaster talking to podcasts, I was able to convince them.
Oh, nice. I love that. Yeah. So I just like learn on the spot. And the podcast community has been incredibly supportive. There are no dumb questions. I've asked questions and found out things. And just, recording episodes, kid pops up in the middle of an interview. I don't know how she took down the baby gate. And, she's whispering, I want milk, in the middle of and I'm freaking out because back then I couldn't separate my tracks. I didn't know what to do. All those little things.
Yeah. So I interrupted you, but you were talking about a listener that was cash flowing and you were about to tell that story.
Oh, yeah. And so she was just like with the cash flow in college. And those are like incredibly good stories and you're trying to focus and everything. And then like my little one came in the middle of that interview. So then that's how I learned how to include music and take out noise in the background. But I feel like I've learned so much, from podcasting, not just the technical part, but just talking with people, picking up things. It's been awesome.
What did you have in mind when you went to podcast movement this year? Because it is an investment for all of us, right? Every year I was lucky it was in my backyard. I'm in Los Angeles this year, but next year I got to go across the country. It's probably a bit closer to you, Philadelphia. Yes. But it's an investment, the hotel, the tickets, the evening events. I mean, everything, it all starts to add up. And I think we all have to look at it, for those of us that are continuing to grow our brands. So I'm wondering, did you think about, given what your show is about, do you think about return on investment, right? Like, do you think about, this is what I want to get out of podcast movement before you went?
Yeah. And I would say this year, it felt different than last year. Like last year I was, my first podcast movement. I think the Radiotopia people they're breaking down their shows and I love a lot of their shows. And I was like, Helen Saltzman, but like for last year, my focus was about the content being a little more polished with the show. So that was the return I was looking for. Yeah. And I got that in spades. And then this year was more about building the platform, getting income streams because, you have sponsorships. Mm-hmm. But this year I've been exploring creating my own products, to serve listeners. And then I just wanted to hear from others who have done it, who's further along in the journey. And then I was exploring Patreon. So that's why I was in that session. Oh, yeah. But the challenge for me is people usually discover me when something's not going well with finances. Yeah. So while you're in debt,
while you're in debt, can you contribute to my podcast, please?
So I wanted to see, like, how do other people do this in this space? What can I take that can apply, to me? And I feel like really good. If maybe I was just more comfortable with everyone in the community. I was a new person. But I made a lot of connections and friends last year, and it was great to see them again. Yeah. So, yes, I am looking at the ROI, and at the end of this month, First of all, you need 2 weeks to decompress.
Oh yeah.
I don't know about you, but there's always like so much you learn. Yes.
All my cards. Also for the listener,
Yes.
I'm showing Elle all the cards I've collected. I've got them all scanned
Is
in.
that 2 decks? That's like 2-3 decks worth?
It's a lot podcast. And then I just went to MapCon, so then I have my smaller pile of MapCon in Philadelphia. So, but I'm really concerted effort. I mean, I used to be like, wait, and then 3 months would go by and I'm like, what did I say to this person? You really have to do it soon after, because it's like out of sight, out of mind. And you try to make notes on it. And obviously I think the idea of having a face on your business card is starting to seem like a better and better idea, because you remember the conversation, you're like, oh, what's that person look like? And so that might be good. What I might do next year, just make sure my face is on there.
That's a good idea. I'm gonna write that face on card. Yeah, so this year my cards were the $20 bill, like it looked like money.
Yeah.
Trying to get, people to look at it, because, when you have so many cards and you're passing it around, I want people to get excited. But then I was telling my roommate, Michelle, I was like, maybe they're disappointed, like after a party, had a couple drinks, they think this is a 20. Oh, no, it's someone's business card. What a ripoff.
Yeah. It's memorable, though.
Yeah. And, you try to make that connection. Because we do work in audio a lot. Sometimes we don't have the face-to-face, whether it's video or in person. So anything that can help out. But I so far, it's been a great experience. Like, I connected with people I wasn't even familiar with in my own space, like breaking banks.
Yeah.
I did not know there was a fintech podcast dedicated to that, which shows you like there's just so many possibilities. And I don't know how you do it, but when I'm doing episodes, it's kind of almost like tunnel vision.
Yeah.
And then when I take a break, I'm catching up on everything. I'm like, oh, that's what they've been doing. Oh, this is fantastic. So I felt like, I've discovered at least 20 new podcasts now.
Oh yeah.
Just podcast moves.
Well, it's always, for me, the conference is an opportunity to just connect on a one-to-one basis. And then then that sort of just solidifies for me that I want the person on the show. And it's rare that I will take a cold person, like a unknown person, to come on the show, because it's like the nature of the conversations is like really casual. They go to about an hour, and I want the listener to feel like we're just catching up, and we're just talking about whatever comes up, and it's hard to do that with someone you've met for the first time. I mean, we've all heard those interviews where just like, oh, those two people just met and they don't know each other, and it sounds really awkward.
Yeah, and it is a challenge, because you probably get a lot of pitches, and I do, because they see couple money, and they can be some crazy stuff. And yes, I do have other podcasters on. I might have, in our niche, you might consider them bigger names or whatever, but the root for me has always been someone who basically is my listener, someone who's married, that wants to work not only on their finances, yes, get out of debt, or, retire early, or start a business, whatever they want, but more importantly, they want their marriage to work better. And so you don't say yes to everybody, obviously. I've had some great guests in terms of head knowledge, financial planners, that they know exactly what they're doing, but I've had to edit them down because they can't tell a story, they can't convey it. And it makes it a lot harder. And when you're a one-woman show, and you're doing weekly, when you're in the season, crushing deadlines. So I have to be smarter about the guests I have. But then when I interview the guests that maybe aren't familiar with podcasts, one, I have to explain what that is.
Yeah.
And then two, like the setup, and make them comfortable. So I kind of am in that middle ground where I don't want them too polished, because I don't want them to sell stuff. I really care about my audience. I want it more to be about encouraging and educating. Mm-hmm. And I also, if they're complicated and they're trying to do some stock option special, they're not going to be a guest on my show. But I get a ton of those emails like, oh, yeah, we got this great person you'd love to have. They made $1 million and everybody can do it.
Yeah.
No, that's like the fast track to delete. You don't even get the autoresponders, just a delete.
Well, you can tell it's almost like we get so used to seeing them that we know what the form letters look like, right?
Yes. And have you gotten the ones where it's not even your podcast? I've gotten like 2 emails in a row. One is mine Yeah, and it's a completely different one. I'm like, that's not even the same
They're
space.
just cutting and pasting.
Yes.
Have you had? I imagine in your space there's mentors or heroes or people you look up to, and so have you had some of those conversations?
Oh, yeah. There are a lot of great people in the FinCon space that, like you mentioned, we are so motivated by podcasting because one, we're podcasting fans, but two, we want to help people.
Yeah.
So that's in their spirit. I would say Joe from Stacking Benjamins.
Mm-hmm.
He won the award for Best Business Podcast, and he deserves it. He works so hard, and he does like a variety show. Like when you talk to him, this guy on the show is so carefree and fun, but there's like such a love for crafting this awesome podcast that I sit and I'm like, oh, I feel like a slacker. And then like Steve Stewart is his editor, and pretty much like everybody's editor. Except for mine. I need to hire him.
He seems to be like he's now, talk about niche of niches.
Yes.
He seems to be like the editor for the FinCon space, right? That's so
Yes.
smart. I mean, I love when I hear like the niche of the niche of the niche, and he's just carved out a space. He's like, okay, I know FinCon, I can podcast, I know how to edit. I think I can do something here.
Yeah, and he's like an editor, but he's also had a podcast show, so he knows what to do. And when he gives you advice, he's like, I've been there, I've done that. He's been incredible. And then I would say also locally, right before podcast, was it right after? Now I'm getting my dates, but it was around podcast movement, and it was a thread on Facebook, and Jared put me in touch with the local podcast group, and they've been like top notch. Everybody's been very generous. And it just encouraged you to try to be generous. And I don't consider myself an expert, but if there's any question or if there's even like social media support I can do, anybody in the group, I try to.
I'm curious with that topic. It's such a sensitive topic, and it's one of those things like, you don't talk about in public company, and a lot of couples don't talk about in private company. So I'm wondering if sometimes the nature of these conversations like open up other things, and you go into topics that you're just like, well, that's not where you expect it to go. And then I wonder if it's ever been like a tricky thing to like manage, like, because it could be like the thread that you pull apart the finance thread, and then all this other stuff opens up.
Like it's all connected. I've had like when I have call guests or email guests or contact them to have them on the show, I have a topic in mind. I think I have the story that would serve listeners, and then we'll have a conversation, and it just goes here, and I change it, what best serve. One of the earliest ones, the episode was about credit consolidation.
Yeah.
Like, how does that work? Because there's so many scams, and a lot of couples, they're usually encountering it right before bankruptcy.
Okay. So
they're under the gun, and there's so many shady people in the business, and I wanted to put that information out there to like look for the right people, ask the right questions. And Travis came on, and he had worked for the debt consolidation company, but he'd been through it. And that was one of the most profound episodes. Not only listeners enjoyed it, but I learned so much empathy. It turned out he had done the finances. This is like, it really is its own episode. He had done the finances for years, and his wife knew that they were in debt, but he was the go-to person. And he kept making more money, and he wasn't trying to like waste it, but in his head, I'm the husband, I'm the provider. He didn't want to say no to his wife. So you fast forward a couple years, they're deep in debt, and then the recession hits. And I think it was Frank Dodd Act had changed. So basically the minimum payments for the credit cards went up just by a little bit, but it was enough to devastate them, because at that point, I want to say just the minimum credit card payments for him at that point was $2,500 a month.
Wow. That
was just the credit cards, not mortgage, not anything else. And once that law changed, he had to come to his wife, and it was ridiculous. He was telling me, and I'm sitting here like, and I don't do the video, and that's another reason I don't do video besides.
That would be intense. That would be intense if you did the video. they'd be watching. Yeah, for the listeners' benefit, Elle was like holding her hands to her head with this astonished look on her face. But I imagine you probably get a lot of that with these conversations.
I do, and he just told his wife, he's like, we're $109,000 in debt. And I think that was just credit cards.
Yeah.
I don't think that counted the mortgage. And we're going to be bankrupt in 10 days or 2 weeks.
Wow.
It was something like that. And I'm sitting like, and all these thoughts go in your head. And it's a really great episode to listen to. But
Sure. Yeah, make sure you send it to me after. I'm going to put it in the show notes.
I will. But for me, I learned so much about empathy
Mm-hmm.
because I typically will make the reaction. I will, like, how could you do that? But then he kept continuing and he was saying the pressure that he had felt and he wasn't intending to put his wife, in this spot, and the conversations they had and where they moved. I mean, this is years later. I actually met them once this was all said and done, and I didn't even know all that drama. Like I had met them at FinCon later, and we were doing a brew tour. I wouldn't have put this, and they were such a loving couple. Like they were like high school sweethearts. That's the way they looked to me. They were so adorable.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that, and I would have, to be honest, would have like judged him. Like, how could you do that? How could you be so incompetent with money?
Yeah.
Not to be mean, but that's, the headspace. And I think that's the gift with podcasting. When you interview and you have people tell their stories, is that you learn more empathy and you can see why. And I think that's served me better. Let my audience be the judge of that. Where my topics now are more like I step back. Like there are certain principles and guidelines where, spend less than you earn, look about what you value, answer what your why is. But then I'll let the couples figure out for themselves, where do they draw that line? Where do they cut back on their spending because it doesn't matter to them? And where does it matter that they should continue spending because it does bring a certain amount of joy or fulfills some certain need?
Have you ever had a situation where the husband or the wife came on and maybe said something that their spouse didn't know and it was like discovered on the episode?
I haven't yet, not like a big secret, but I've had couples kind of reveal, like my husband did, what they were really thinking. And I just recently had, it hasn't aired yet, but Tony and Lisa from One Extraordinary Marriage, and they're sharing their story and they're going back and they're sitting there and they're trying to piece. Like when you have a marriage and I think they've been married almost 21 years.
Okay.
There's a lot of history. And so you see that banter like, wait, no, real. Remember when you did that? No. So you have those moments.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch because a lot of times I do interviews with people in the middle of the journey, but I do a lot of interviews afterwards. And you can feel when they go back to that moment, they're in that moment.
Yeah.
And then to hear them now and they're laughing and they're having that banter, or, one of them's on the show, you just hear them they're just chuckling to themselves like, oh my goodness, I couldn't believe how stupid I am.
Yeah.
Those little moments I think are incredibly helpful. So I try to keep it in the podcast.
Yeah. It's all about bringing out the real emotion. Cause I think I like that when podcasts or episodes are not polished and there's like little quirks and mistakes and just like unexpected moments, because that's what real life is about. And I think to the extent that the more we keep that as podcasters, like in our shows, I think those are the ones and you've probably experienced this where like the listeners like pay attention and it's like I left a moment where the UPS guy came and I went to the door and I was like, the freaking UPS guy. And you hear me getting up and then my guest was on the phone and he makes a phone call because the conversation's on hold. So you hear him calling his friend and it was like, and a couple of listeners was like, I know you want to be real, but like, did you mean to do that? And I was like, no. So rapidly, like quickly try to edit a new version of To Lipson. It was funny.
And it happens, and it's kind of nice to have that peak.
Yeah.
And you get more comfortable with yourself and you develop that connection with the audience that now I listen to episodes and I feel not that I was trying to be fake or in the first episodes, but I feel like I'm more comfortable in my own skin to talk about stuff, not only with the guests and, we swap marriage stories because it's like war stories. Let me tell you about this. But, with the listeners. So like this week, I'm going to do an episode about debt and depression because that's been something
Oh,
on the
that's
minds of a
big.
lot of people. Yeah,
Yeah.
this month to build awareness. And I'm going to share. I've talked a little bit, and it's hard to write about it for me. Like certain things I think just comes across a lot easier with audio versus writing about it. So I think instead of having my usual, have a written piece and an audio, I'm just going to let the audio speak for itself.
I feel like that topic is something that lends itself really well to audio because it's so intimate, right? People are listening on earbuds, and stories like that. That one I think is going to hit home because that's real, and that's one of those topics, depression, that everyone goes through in varying forms. And when you're going through it, like the last thing you want to do is talk about it. But I think if you can share the story, it's just this feeling like, oh, I'm not alone out there.
Yeah, and that's what I want to do with the podcast is at the very least, couples know that if you guys want to, you can work it out.
Hmm.
It's not going to be easy. I don't want it to make it like, oh yeah, it's like a Rocky movie where bam,
Yeah.
after 55 minutes you're done. You're
Yeah.
you're great. I've had couples where they've been like 109 and it was 7 years
Oh, wow.
to get out of debt. And the reason was they couldn't agree on how fast to pay it off. And they both had valid reasons. And I wanted to share that on the podcast.
Okay.
Those are discussions where you probably have an opinion. Of course, I had an opinion about who I thought was kind of more right, but that's not my place. That's not my marriage.
Hmm.
And the real point in the podcast is how do you work together and find your peace within
That's
your
good.
marriage? Yeah. Because, one couple, she was into Dave Ramsey. I'm not sure if you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's gazelle intense. And she's like, let's do this. And he was like, I agree. We need to get out of debt, but we have 2 young kids. And I don't want to take away from that. Like, we're never going to get that time back.
Yeah.
Even if we shave a year or 2 off, I don't think it's worth in the context. And they found a happy medium that worked for them. And I think that's what it's about for my podcast is definitely don't go deeper into debt, but how do you find yourself as a couple? Like what's your why? What are you working towards? And how do you respect each other as you're working together on this?
And at the same time, and as hard as it would be in that situation, like enjoy life to the extent that you can. And there's like,
Yeah.
to his point, there's moments that aren't going to come back. And, do you want to penny pinch your way through your whole entire life and just feel like, well, it was nice rice and beans we had for the last, 20 years. Every once in a while, I think I imagine there's room for some bit of splurging or
Mhm.
conscientious, celebrating or something like that.
Yeah. And I think that's what makes marriage and money so fascinating and doing a podcast about that because you usually have opposites to some degree that attract each other and they both have valid points. And, I know I lean towards one way. One of the questions was like, if you guys know it's going to be years before you get out of debt, should you go on family vacations?
Hmm.
And if so, what do they look like? And I don't want to answer that in terms of this is what you should do because I think there's enough of those voices in the personal finance space.
Yeah.
There's enough people who are hardcore one way or the other. And I feel like there's not enough people showing the questions that you should be considering and thinking about and answering for yourself. And, I'm learning that, through our own marriage. It's more important to get the right question instead of looking for the quick answer.
It seems like the podcast has helped you grow. You mentioned empathy. I'm wondering if there's anything else that how you've changed as a person as a result of going through these 200 plus episodes.
This is going to sound weird and ironic and counterintuitive because a lot of my day-to-day is writing about personal finance, but I've realized I don't quite care about money in the financial terms of we want to have $1 million in the bank or 650. I keep going back to what are we doing and why? And I think my husband and I are having better conversations about that. And I think that's changed when you're in debt, when we paid off $35,000 of debt, like that number is so important. Like, oh, you see it going down. Oh, you get motivated about it. And then it's like, and then what?
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. It is a huge relief,
of course,
not to have our hard-earned money going towards a lender for something that we bought years ago and it's not that great now. but it's like, okay, we have enough money, and we're working towards that plan. Could we like bust through it and retire even sooner? Yeah, we could, but I like exploring podcasting
Mm-hmm.
as a business, as an art form. I have two young kids. My husband's trying to make arrangements with work to work from home more. Like those things matter to us. And I think that's changed because I've listened and I've talked to people who are now on the other side and gotten that perspective. And I thought, you know what? This is something I do want to work towards. I want to work towards financial independence, but I'm not so, I guess, gung ho or gazelle intense
Mm-hmm.
as others in the industry. It's more like, yeah, I'm going to get there. We have a system, and I talk about like how you can set stuff up, but I want to enjoy the journey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is this your background? Financial? Did you study this in school or?
No, I've always been interested in finances. Like my mom will tell me I was the kid who had all these odd jobs. I like recycling. That was my thing. I used to do bike stunts. Do not ask me if I could do really good bike stunts, but I would charge for my shows.
Bike stunts. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was only 2 weeks after learning how to ride a bike. I was going to do a show.
Like BMX bikes?
Yeah, but I didn't have a BMX. But I would see all that on TV, and I'm like, yeah, I could do that. Get some, crates, put it together. It was, so I've been interested in that. No, but I went to school for operations management and supply chain management.
Oh yeah,
which sounds incredibly boring.
No, I
enjoy puzzles.
You enjoy what?
Yeah, go ahead. Puzzles and figuring things out and getting things done by a certain time. So that to me was entertaining.
Well, I think it's this. There's probably a mind, like the way your mind works. I like puzzles too. I used to like building models. I used to be the one who, when the furniture came, I'd be like, I'll put it together, and I'd spread out the paper on the floor, and I'd be like, slot A goes into tab B, and I'd be like, and I'd enjoy doing that. And they're like, oh, Harry's gonna put together the chair we just bought. I just had this natural curiosity because it's kind of like this fascination with how things work and how things are put together.
Yeah, and I think that carried over, and I just love, I guess, the art of podcasting, as cheesy as it sounds. Like I used to listen to radio all the time, and I was drawn towards, the story base and NPR even as a kid, just to listen to it. I also like to help. I think my mom being a teacher influenced me. Like I'd never had an aspiration to be a teacher, but I love that idea of helping others and not necessarily doing a lecture style teaching. But I think like story-based teaching is incredibly powerful.
What is your family who knew you? I mean, when they pre-podcast, like they had, I guess, maybe this idea of what you're going to do, what you're going to be, but now you're a podcaster, right? So
they didn't see that. Like they totally didn't see that. And I should say, like, Elle Martinez is my podcasting pen name.
Okay.
Because I write about marriage and money. And so I had to announce like this year, hey, by the way, I got this book coming out. I'm doing this. But I have a podcast. And they're like, what? What is going on here? My mom cracked up. Like she couldn't believe it. Because I was the kid that spent much. And then she realized, through the years I had told her, oh yeah, I'm writing about personal finance. But she realized we're dumping debt and stuff like that. And then I gave her a copy of the book. And she's like, this is good. This isn't boring.
Thanks, Mom.
It's like, thanks. Because I've always liked to write, but I was never in the mind space of, I'm going to be an author.
Yeah.
So that was a surprise for her. Like she just thought I was going to be more into like business and technology and IT growing up, because that interests me at the time. And then I went to college and realized, you know what? It's not my cup of tea. I enjoy being around it.
Yeah.
And then, life takes you a different path.
I do have a supply chain connection. I used to do IT consulting, and my client was Unilever.
Oh.
So I'm fairly familiar. I didn't geek out completely, but yeah, I know of it. And we were providing like tech services to supply chain companies. So it was interesting.
Nice. Yeah, I had an internship with SEBA in Virginia. Okay. It was like the best paying internship. And it turned out like they were incredibly like sweet and knowledgeable people. I love that internship, even though that's not the career path I went. But that was a great opportunity. And I loved just that idea, like, hey, you know what? You're the intern, but we're still going to have you responsible for something,
Okay.
and it was like laundry detergents, the components of it, the powder and everything. It's like, it's kids coming from England,
Yeah.
and we have to have all, the warehouses in Canada and the West Coast done, make sure everything's ordered correctly. And it was good. I'm sure someone was checking my work. But yeah, that's what my mom thought I was going to be doing. And then that journey on the side, writing about personal finance, kind of took off. And I just fell in love with it. I think I'm more in love with talking with people and helping people versus just the finances themselves.
Can you talk a little bit about what your mindset was as you were getting started? Because I know for myself, I was staring at all these podcasts and all these podcasters, and I didn't know a lot. And I was like, am I qualified to do this? Like, I don't know if I was, and obviously, that kept me on the fence for longer than it probably should have. But I'm wondering, in your space, there's from the Dave Ramsey's down, right? And did you have a moment where you're wondering what you were going to be able to contribute to the space?
From day one. So the funny thing is, I remember being at the very first FinCon in Chicago, and it was the whole, like, we could fit in one conference room, like really small space. And PT, who's the head of FinCon, he pulled in Cliff. He was introducing podcasting. And I was asking him questions. I was curious about it because, like I said, people were emailing me. And then he's like, that'd be great if you and your husband be on the show and just talk it out. And I knew my husband. He's still, like, he's a special guest on the show, but that's not his cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, that's not going to be it. And I kept going, how am I going to do this? Because I didn't want this to be like a vanity thing. I didn't want this to be like, oh, it's just me doing a podcast because other people are doing a podcast.
Yeah.
But part of it, the irony was, I did it because I was pregnant with our second child. And I realized, freelance writing and doing some other projects, I needed something I had more control over with my schedule. And I thought, you know what? Why don't I try this podcasting? So I did that when I was 6 or 7 months pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
I said, let me just go all in.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave myself, looking back, an ambitious, ridiculous goal. Twice a week.
Okay.
Like, no experience, no idea how I'm going to edit
how hard
or
can it
do
be?
anything. I was like, because the great people make it seem so easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the bad thing. When you do it so well, you're just like, oh yeah, they're just talking, aren't they?
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah. And so I did, and for almost exactly to a year, I did 2 episodes. So it was like week 48, I had 96 episodes, and I was just burned out. I was like, oh, okay, this is the end of season 1. Not that I started off saying this was a seasonal kind of show, but I announced, like, and this is the end of season 1.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to do it in batches.
AKA, I am out of gas.
Yeah, because you do put a lot of yourself into it. And I don't know if you've done this, but every time I pick up something new and I get a flow and I'm doing great and I just saved myself 2 hours, then the next episode, I want to do this, which adds more work to it. So I got to get better on that.
Do you think about this from a legacy perspective? Because you've got two daughters, you said, right?
Yes.
And so now there's a record of you. Now there's these 200 plus episodes of your voice, and do you think about them thinking about this being something that they could do as well?
I will say my 6-year-old is thinking about it. By the way, I think she could do a basic podcast because she knows how mommy edits and when I'm recording and everything, because they're upstairs right now and they know they have to be quiet and they can only watch the DVD and everything. Yeah, she wants to be a vet music teacher. She's at the age where they have the dual career.
Yeah.
But then she's also like, yeah, and then I can talk about it on my episodes like you do.
Wait, she wants to be a vet, a music teacher, and a podcaster.
Yes. But in her mind, they all come together.
Well, I think we live in a world where there's probably stranger combinations that have happened, and with the technology that exists now, I mean, she could just have a lapel mic and be taking care of the dog, and while I don't know, learning about chords or something. I don't know, some weird.
You know what?
combination.
I wouldn't kids. I wouldn't put it past her. And now I'm starting to do like video
Yeah. Oh wow.
with some of it, and she's like, "Oh, I want to do video." So I've been recording all these review shows she's been doing about her favorite stuff,
Hmm.
topics on her mind. Um, yeah, but I think there's so many options. But I love whether or not they follow me with podcasting or personal finance. I love the idea that they can see that they have options
Yeah.
with their career. If they want to build their career around their family or whatever they value, or if they want to be 9 to 5 like their dad, they can do what fits them. And that I'm really excited about if I could leave a legacy.
Yeah, and I think it's letting them try and
Hmm.
try as every like when you buy your kids all the instruments and like here's the clarinet, here's the drums, like here's the
Yeah.
violin, here's the flute, and then they eventually gravitate towards one.
Yeah, and you know what? And they'll take some piece of that and just blow your mind with what they do.
Yeah.
Of course, I did not do that. I was in strings class, I was violin, I enjoyed it, but that is right now not in my career.
That's it. That's the next phase of your life. You
There you go.
I was random tangent. I found a podcast about it's antique flutes or something like that. It's really strange. Yeah, I've been trying to Fidelio or something like it's called. I found a podcast and I was like, I got to talk to her. Been trying to track her down on Twitter. I can't find her. I got to look it up. But it was only specifically about like antique flutes or clarinets or something like that. Yeah, like it was really,
Wow.
really super niche. I think it's called like Fidelio or something like that. Yeah. Yeah. So just fascinating there.
Yeah. I'm always interested in like that in our personal local podcast group. There's people there where I'm like, oh, you can do a podcast on that? Have you done a podcast on that? Ham radio.
Okay.
There's when he does a video podcast, and I have no interest in ham radio, but I love his show.
Hmm. Yeah, that's what
Uh,
happens sometimes. It's like the personality that really attracts you.
yeah, and then there's one I did not know. Apparently, Raleigh is the mecca for competitive shooting.
Competitive.
I did not know that, and one of the top people has a podcast.
Of course.
And so I'm like, wow, look, you're awesome. And then this guy is a videographer, and he's doing one about people who pretend to be other people. Like, how did they come up with this stuff?
Is that like
Yeah,
catfish? Like
it's kind of it's like it's called Pretend Radio,
oh, okay.
and like he interviewed like was it FBI or CIA guy who pretended to be someone else, but scam artists and so forth. Like, how did
Wow.
they keep that up? What were they
Yeah.
thinking? I mean, he's only done, it's been less than 20 episodes, but I'm sitting there and like, this is very professional.
That's
And I feel
fascinating.
like a chump, but you, you come in,
Yeah.
he joins the group and he's like, whew. I mean, there's a lot of great shows in there. And then there's one for like health and wellness
Yeah.
with human resources. And of course, this is IT area. So you have software. There's so many different niches and genres. And I think I was more aware that this year with podcast movement, chatting,
Mhm.
sitting at the table, asking people what they do, that just like blew my mind. I'm sure that they're like, you're doing marriage and money? What? Who does that?
Yeah, exactly. So many interesting ways you can go. At this point, I'm not surprised anymore. I sat in on Elsie Escobar's and Jessica's
Oh,
live she podcasts, that podcast
yeah.
movement, and they were talking about strangest weird podcasts heard that weekend and stuff like that. So there was some weird stuff out there. Some of it not exactly family friendly. I was thinking about topics and how you find stuff, and I imagine you never run out of ideas, especially with all the stuff popping up in the news. I was just curious about the latest news around Equifax, right?
That was it, and that is a blessing and a curse because I was debating what this week's episode was going to be because I do have a rough outline and I was going to swap it out, but you will be having an Equifax, and that's a lot of current events, what's going on. Unfortunately, I think that Equifax mess is going to be here for a while.
Yeah.
So, I also, not that I have a team and I don't consider myself a reporter or researcher, but I try to do some due diligence. So for stuff like that, I want to make sure that I vet, if I see any resources, make sure they're legit, what's going on, answer some questions. Because I think with the Equifax, there's so much in the air. At first it was, oh, if you sign up for this, you're going to give up your right to sue. And then it took a few days and they got that squared away. Yeah. And then it was like, wait a minute, you lost this data. I mean, this was a data breach. Why are we paying you after the first year to watch it? Can you like refund me? Can I use some of the other credit bureaus?
So it's like, it's like, did I get an Equifax alert about the Equifax breach?
Yeah, you almost want to say like, are you here to make money? Because I feel like this data breach just benefits you.
Yeah. Have you heard of
identity?
Did you hear about the Chatbot?
No, what happened?
No. This is interesting. this is like technology for good. So there's a guy who created a chatbot, and you just fill in the chatbot, and it automatically populates the forms for you to sue Equifax for up to $15,000. I'll send you the link. It's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Now that's good. I thought it was like something. I was like, oh no, is there another hoax? Because people send me stuff. And I'm like, oh,
yeah.
gosh.
If you Google Chatbot Equifax, it's like the number one thing. This guy's a programmer, and he said, he's on a mission. He's like the Robin Hood of the internet. He wants to eliminate like lawyers, because a lawyer would charge you like $1,000 just to fill out that form. Yeah. And he would just fill out all their stuff, where you live, your name, blah, blah, blah. And then the actual PDF prints out at the end. And then you just, I did it. I was like, yeah, if that's $15K in my pocket, I'll go for it,
Yes.
So it was, you could probably link that when you talk about the episode.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm always looking for that, and I do get requests. And I think another reason the podcast works so well is I try to not just like what interests me or what we're going through, but users will email me, or I'll see patterns in the questions that they're asking. That hey, this is on someone's mind.
Yeah.
So
very cool.
That, like you say, there's always a well to pull up from.
Yeah. No shortage of topics in finance and personal finance.
Exactly.
So a couple other questions as we head into the home stretch. What's something you've changed your mind about recently?
Let's see. My goodness, I feel like lack of sleep has helped. I think as a parent, I know that there's this tendency like, oh, you got to stick on top of it and worry about every little thing. I think that's changed recently where, you know what, she's going to make mistakes. Kids are being kids. That's been something. I'm curious to learn more about certain topics. Okay. Like one thing for FinCon, we're doing certain topics with like healthcare, basic income. And I'm always looking forward to stuff like that because I feel comfortable saying I don't know enough to quite like hammer in like, this is how I feel about this.
Yeah.
Try to stay curious, try to stay informed, up to a certain point.
It seems like I get the sense that you are open to have your mind changed if someone presents a compelling argument.
I think so. And I think I've been alive long enough in the in the podcast itself, where I don't want to say there's an exception to every rule, but then, there are guidelines.
Yeah.
And there are ways where I think we get so hung up on, like all debt is evil for some people. And others are like, hey, just milk the system. I definitely feel like debt is a burden for most.
Yeah.
But then I realize, okay, there are times like a mortgage.
Yeah.
That's a debt. So I think I'm less inclined to, which probably goes against all those like expert secrets and like tips to be a popular person in your celebrity, niche, because I don't have like one of those hardcore rules. I'm more of a person like I want to listen to the sides and I want to ask questions and then I'm going to take away, and I need time to process. So that's kind of my thing. And I think that's what drew me to the podcast is, audio gives you time to kind of listen to the episode and think about the episode and not feel like you're forced to, okay, how do you feel about this? Yeah. Is this your new mental shift? No, I got nudged this way, but I'm going to listen to another episode and see how I feel about it.
Especially when you start podcasting that long, you've probably said things that you've changed your mind about and on the show itself, and just had a different opinion on. Yeah,
like the whole joint versus separate.
Okay.
And I feel like, yes, there are certain couples that make it harder for themselves when they keep everything separate. But I think instead of jumping in on that, asking them, why do they have it? Because they could have a very good reason.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, it's their second marriage, third marriage, whatever the situation is, or they came from a previous marriage that was abusive, or they have issues that they love their new spouse, their husband and wife, but they're not at that point yet.
Mm.
And they want to work to it. So jumping in on that, I feel, again, like I've become more sympathetic and empathetic to hearing other people's take on it, that I don't want to sound like I'm wishy-washy.
No, it makes sense.
But
No,
I
you're
feel like, life, you find that balance. And I think I'm more interested in asking questions and figuring out why they do what they do.
Yeah. What's the one most misunderstood thing about you?
That being frugal means cheap.
Mm.
Like, my friends are always like, oh, I got this great deal. Okay, so the problem is I love a great deal. Like, I'm not sure if you heard ThreadUp, but basically it's like an online consignment store.
Okay.
And they have really nice things. And my friends know, I love a good thrift shop find and so forth. But that doesn't mean I take everything from the thrift shop. I'm really picky. I'm trying to look for like high quality stuff at a good price. Video games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I love video games. What? And people are like, how could you do that? That's such a waste of time. I'm like, no, I enjoy a good game. I'm an RPG girl.
Okay.
Up until the last 10 minutes of Mass Effect, all those, months I devoted to play that game and everything. I was like, yeah, this is great. Won't talk about the last 10 minutes. I'm really big on value-based spending. And I feel like when you say you're frugal, people are thinking you're against spending at all. And I'm like, but money's a tool.
Yeah.
It can help you and hopefully help others. I do think there should be more giving, and people should make it a regular part of the budget. And that's what we're thinking about this year, and being more generous.
This is so interesting. Like, sometimes you see these Venn diagrams of the different overlapping interests, and I immediately thought of like Danny Pena and Gamertag Radio. And I'm like, oh, you should. I don't know if you've talked to him, or you could probably geek out on gaming for a little bit there.
I know. Maybe I can talk to him about marriage and money. No.
I'm gonna make that happen. So, because I've spoken to both of you now, so I think.
Oh no, that would be great. Now, I actually last year for 6 months straight, I had this idea. I was like, I told my husband Rob, I said we should do a game design podcast. But I'm like, listen, not the current games.
Mm-hmm.
We go back to the old games and why we love them, and that we keep coming back to, because we got the Raspberry Pi, but my husband still has his Nintendo and Super NES. And we promised ourselves, we're like, no, these kids are going to appreciate old school games. So we're having our 6-year-old go through this, and she is in tears with Mega Man. This is so hard. She's playing Super Mario and she's falling off the cliff, and we're sitting here like, this is the frustration. This is good. We want you to like appreciate this stuff. And then we have their older friends, and they're like, what is this? I can't tell what it is. And she goes, it's a tree. Why is it square? Like, you guys are spoiled.
Well, there's a whole like 8-bit like move like thing. Like, there's like 8-bit games and like super pixelated stuff. Like, that's a thing or a trend now. So.
Yeah, and I just stuff like that. I would love to. I told my husband, like, if you ever want to start a podcast, we should do that podcast. Not that I don't enjoy talking about money and marriage, but there's other things outside of that.
No, but I mean, every single podcaster has their like list of like podcasts to start. I mean, I don't know any podcaster that's not just thinking up like another 2 or 3, like, and then they think about what's involved in doing a podcast. I'm like, okay, never mind. I'll put that on.
Like, we're going to fit that in. But then you're like, but I could have an excuse to study all those games. Because I actually pitched that to Radiotopia last year.
Oh, really? Nice.
Yeah, I finally committed. I'm like, we can at least try. Don't be a quitter. We can at least say we pitched it. Of course. Yeah, didn't get accepted. No, but ear hustle is good.
It's all right.
It's good.
Well, Elle, thanks. I want to thank you for finally making it onto the show.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I think it's it's nice to like know of each other, and then like have small chats, and then I think, but I just love the idea of like having the hour-long conversation. I learned a lot about I didn't know you were into bike stunts and puzzles and Super Mario Brothers. So that's really cool.
Yeah. I, have other interests besides.
Well, it's interesting, and it's nice for podcasters to hear that, because they think like, oh, they're just talking about that on their show. But it's like sort of like we have layers, we have complexity, and we have other interests, and I think that's what makes this whole, at least our group of podcasting friends, and I think that's what makes them all so interesting.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having the show. You're a great interviewer.
Thank you.
Because it's a hard skill.
Yeah.
I've learned the hard way. It's a hard skill to pull people out of their shell.
Yeah. I just try to get better every day. I watch, Charlie Rose and Terry Gross and just even Larry King and just like everything. I'm a student of the craft of like interviewing, and it's like, oh, Tim Ferriss, Alec Baldwin has a great one. So it's just I keep listening, and every once in a while I'm like, oh, that's a good question, or that, oh, I see what he did there. So yeah, eternal student, if you will.
Yes.
So what's the best place for folks to track you down?
I think the best place would be couplemoney.com. I try to keep it simple. I'm one of those, everything at that one spot. Got the podcast. You can get the episodes, articles. If you're a video person, you get to deal with me on YouTube. And if you want a book, we have a book too.
So Couple Money Podcast, and that's the link to all your other social media stuff as well.
Yes, everything's on Couple Money. Yep, keep it simple. Facebook, Twitter. I say hi.
Well, thanks for taking the time, and I'm happy to stay connected with you.
Thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
So happy to finally get Elle on the show. It's really so much fun for me. It's really so much fun as a podcaster when I know someone in passing, and then I know that because I established an initial great connection with them, that I'm going to get to know them more. So as much as you're enjoying these conversations and getting these nuggets of wisdom from these fantastic people that I'm having on the show, I'm really getting benefit from it as well. And this is for you as a podcaster to be thinking about all the time. This opportunity that you have as a host to have guests on, always treat that relationship like gold. I've said it many, many times. It happens in your initial meetings with the person, whether it's at a conference or at a meetup or at a training. And then it continues into the engagement you have with how you connect with them after that conference. And then in your relationship, if you see them again a second or a third time, and then when you finally invite them on your show, and the lead up to the show, and how easy it was for them to sign up, and how you collect the information that you're going to use from them to promote the show, and what they're working on, and just this whole process. And this is some of the stuff I talk about with my clients, but I want you to keep this in mind too as a podcaster. If you're having guests on your show, remember, always look at every single part of the engagement and make sure that you're adding value at every step in the chain, and you'll just get so much benefit out of it that it'll build relationships that are going to last a lifetime. And I'm a testament to that. I have relationships with my first guest, Chase Reeves. If you heard episode 100, you'll know what a fun time we had there. And that's a friendship that I'll have for a long time, hopefully forever. And that's just one of dozens, if not more, friends that I've met through the podcast, because I've decided to make this a long-term investment for me. We are a member of Podcastica. Head on over to podcastica.com to see our full list of shows. Intro and outro music created by the wonderful Cedar and Soil. You can check out his music at cedarsoil.com. Thanks again to Podbean, as always, for being a sponsor of the show. Podbean.com/podcastjunkies. If you've already downloaded our PDF, then the call to action number 2 would be to write a review. If you are new to the show and you're getting value from it, as you might imagine, reviews are a really fantastic way to show support. If you've heard this request 4, 5, or 6 times and you still haven't written it, then this is your signal to get up off your butt and do that. As a podcaster myself, I tend to go out of my way when I can to write 1 or 2 because I know that's important. And as a podcaster, I'd love for people to do that for my show. And so I have to return the favor in kind. If you've written the review or you already have downloaded the PDF, which is found at podcastjunkies.com/8tools, and that can be the number 8 or the spelled out the word 8 tools. That's going to be the PDF that shows you all the tools that we're using right now and that I've used to help launch my show, which will come in handy if you're a new podcaster as well. So you've made it this far, which means that you want the retention hashtag in your pockets. So we're going to make it Elle Money. That's ELLEMONEY, hashtag Elle Money. And you can tag myself at podcast_junkies. And you can tag, there's a couple here for Elle. You can tag couple money. If you want to just tag that, that's the podcast. Couple money, one word, at couple money. And Elle has her own personal Twitter handle at LELLE_CM. C as in Charlie, M as in money. So thank you so much for everything you do to support the show. Without you, I don't know what I would be doing. Maybe fishing or DJing or flying a kite, or if you have a suggestion of something, another hobby that I can do if I wasn't podcasting, I'd love to hear you recommend it. So this is the part where I ramble within this show. And if you made it this far, I wonder if I should do another retention hashtag. Never mind. Thank you. Have a fantastic day. High five.